Even with today's super advanced technology, there are still some things that leave experts baffled and confused. Here are the top 5 unexplained mysteries. Number 1. Dyatlov Pass. The Dyatlov Pass incident is where a group of 9 Russian hikers decided to hike to the top of the northern Ural Mountains in 1959. 2 or 3 days into the actual hike, they got lost and deviated off course by about a mile. The weather was deteriorating, so they decided to pitch their tent on a slope of a mountain that was about 30 degrees. The next morning, February 9th, all 9 hikers were dead. Their tent was found by a search party on February 26th. The tent the hikers were sleeping in was knocked down and covered in a little bit of snow. No hikers were found inside. The tent had also been cut open several times from the inside. 5 hikers were found down a slope about a mile away near a tree line after investigators followed foot tracks to that location. The 5 hikers were dead. They had very little clothing on and no shoes. The clothing was made up of some sweaters and socks, not enough clothing to keep warm in the weather conditions. Autopsies revealed that they all died of hypothermia. The remaining 4 hikers were found 2 months later, another 250 feet into the woods. They were in a ravine under about 13 feet of snow. Investigators thought they too had died of hypothermia, even though they were dressed much better than the other 5 hikers. The autopsy revealed a very different story. The hikers found in the ravine died of trauma. Some of them were missing their eyes and tongues and had several fractures in their skulls. The clothes from all 4 hikers also were radioactive. Several of the hikers had skull fractures, and other hikers had trauma to the chest, as if a foot was pushing in the middle of the chest and broke several ribs, pushing them outwards. Russia quickly classified the case and refused to release any information about it, until recently, where the case files have been released to the public. The case files indicate that they were all killed in an avalanche despite there being no evidence of an avalanche. The footsteps out of the tent were still present when they were found, and the skis that were placed around the tent vertically were still vertical when the hikers were found. The lead investigator finally came forward and said the Russian government forced him to exclude the eyewitness testimony of orange orbs in the sky the night they had all died. He also said the trees had burn marks on them, which he thought came from a UFO. He actually had said this in his report, but the Russian government concealed it. The Dyatlov Pass incident has several theories, but one of the leading theories is alien activity. Number 2. Brandon Swanson. May of 2008, 19-year-old Brandon Swanson was celebrating his last day of college for the year with his friends. Brandon and his friends were having a few drinks at one of their houses near Lind, Minnesota. As Brandon was driving home, he lost control of his vehicle and ended up in a ditch. Unable to get the car out of the ditch, he called his parents for a ride. His parents drove to pick up their son. While driving, Brandon's dad talked on the cell phone to his son. His parents arrived at the location Brandon gave them, but they were unable to find Brandon's car. They began to flash their headlights in an attempt to locate each other to no avail. Frustrated, Brandon said he was going to head in the direction of the Lynn Town lights. He said he was going to cut through some fields to make it faster. Brandon and his parents agreed to meet at the Lynn Tavern. While Brandon's parents were headed to the Lynn Tavern to pick Brandon up, they were still talking on the phone. While on the phone, they discussed where Brandon was. Brandon said he was walking on a gravel road. Then he said he saw 2 fence lines and heard running water. The call lasted about 45 minutes. Around 2:30 a.m., after a brief silence, Brandon yelled, "Oh shit," and the call disconnected. Brandon's father said it sounded like Brandon fell right before the call ended. This was the last time Brandon's father ever heard his son's voice. After making several more calls to Brandon, they were not able to get through to him. Brandon's parents called his friends to assist in the search. They searched all night for Brandon, but were unable to locate him. Brandon's parents alerted the authorities around 6:30 a.m. The police brushed off the missing report at first, chalking it up to the usual young man just done with his first year of college, out partying. One of the officers actually said it was Brandon's right to be missing. Police finally started their search for Brandon late that same morning, after being bugged by Brandon's parents all morning long. After searching for a few hours with no luck, police obtained Brandon's cell phone records and were able to trace his location to Taunton, about 25 miles away from Lind. After searching near Taunton, police were able to locate Brandon's vehicle that was indeed stuck in a ditch on a gravel road. The police were not able to determine which way Brandon started to travel the previous night. Police even brought out search dogs to search for Brandon, but had no luck. The Yellow Medicine River was nearby. Police thought he might have fallen into the water and drowned. There were several searches of the water that had gone on for several weeks, but no body was ever found. Authorities stated it was unlikely that Brandon fell into the water and a body was not recovered. They started to rule out the drowning theory. They also thought he could have wandered into a nearby wooded area. That area was thoroughly searched and no body was found. There was a red light from a grain elevator in the distance near where Brandon's car was found. This was thought to be the light that Brandon mistakenly thought was Lind. That area was also searched with no results. The water that was heard on the phone was likely the river, but again, officers do not believe in the drowning theory because they would have found the body. Brandon's parents do not believe Brandon would have purposely tried to disappear. They think there was either someone following him in the shadows, or there was something else that happened. There are several theories to the missing persons case, one of them being UFO activity. Number 3. The Lost Colony of Roanoke. In 1583, the Queen of England granted Walter Raleigh part of North Carolina. Raleigh was awarded the lands to the south, though much of it was already claimed by Spain. Raleigh quickly arranged an expedition to explore his new land. It departed on April 27, 1584, but Raleigh was forbidden to leave England, so he had to send a few people in his place. The voyage sailed until they found land at Cape Fear, which is present-day North Carolina. The Native Americans that were already on the land made friendly relationships with the new Englishmen that had just landed on their coastline. This voyage returned to England in the autumn of 1584 to give Raleigh and the Queen the good news about what they had discovered. They spoke highly of the Native American tribes they encountered. They even brought back 2 Native Americans with them to heighten the relationship. The Queen liked what she was hearing, and she granted Raleigh the land. Again, Raleigh stayed behind, but appointed Ralph Lane to lead the voyage and be the new governor of the new land they were going to colonize. The main objective was to search the land for natural resources and start the colony, then wait for another round of colonizers to join them at a later date. This plan was thwarted when only half the fleet made it to the correct location. This means they were only able to colonize about 100 people. The colonizers that did make it to the land struggled to fend for themselves. They had to rely heavily on the local Native American tribes for food and shelter. They also sent out exploration teams that would soon leave a wake of disease in their path. Shortly after the exploration teams would make contact with new Native American tribes, the tribes would soon encounter severe illness and death. The Native American tribes began to take note of the selfish English settlers, and this caused tension between them. Tensions rose to the point that the Native American tribes started gathering their forces. Lane gained some insight into one of the gatherings the Native Americans were having and preemptively attacked them. The Native Americans were not prepared for the attack and were sent retreating, not before Lane was able to capture a few of the Native American leaders. This happened several more times. Tensions were at an all-time high, so Lane decided to take his colony and head back to England. Despite the failed Lane colony, Raleigh decided to make another attempt to colonize his newly inherited land. Raleigh knew Roanoke Island would not be safe after Lane managed to piss off every Native American on the land, so he decided to head for Chesapeake Bay. Raleigh approved the charter and named White the governor. The ships departed on May 8, 1587, and anchored on July 22nd at Croatoan Island, just south of where Lane caused all of the issues. 3 days after making port on July 25th, all the colonists disembarked in the same region as the previous failed Lane colony. That same day, colonist George Howe was killed by a Native American while searching alone for crabs. White dispatched a few high-ranking colonists to reestablish a relationship with the Croatoan natives, but there was no response. White planned a preemptive strike on the natives in retaliation for them killing Howe. Fearing retaliation from killing George Howe, the natives moved locations so White and his group only attacked a few looters that were left in the village. Shortly after those incidences, White moved the colony about 50 miles north. The colonists persuaded White to return to England to explain the colony's desperate situation and ask for help. White agreed and departed for England on August 27, 1587. White reached England on November 5th. At this time, the Spanish Armada was mobilizing for an attack, and Queen Elizabeth ordered all ships to stay in England so they could participate in the forthcoming battle. White would not receive another chance at getting a supply ship out to his colonists until 1590. Raleigh arranged for White to climb aboard a private expedition organized by another wealthy elitist, John Watts. This fleet was made up of 6 ships that were in no hurry to get to Roanoke to help the colonizers. They spent the summer of 1590 raiding Spanish outposts in the Caribbean. 2 ships finally left with White on board and headed for Roanoke. They arrived and anchored at Croatoan Island on August 12, 1590, more than 3 years after White had initially left to get supplies. However, they never left the ship to explore since they spotted smoke plumes coming from Roanoke Island. The next morning, they headed over to Roanoke to investigate the smoke plumes. Upon reaching the site of the colony on Roanoke Island, White noticed the area had been fortified with a palisade, and the word Croatoan was carved in the post. There were no colonists in sight. They also found that the living quarters had been dismantled, and all the belongings looked as though they had been looted. After looking around the area for a while, they decided to head back to the ship. The search party decided to head back to Croatoan, but encountered several issues with the ship that inevitably made them head back to England without searching again for the colonizers. There have been several other attempts to locate the lost colony over the next several decades, but no one has been able to confirm what happened to the Roanoke colony. There have been several rumored sightings in the 1600s and 1700s of seeing people dressed in English-style clothing, but there have never been any confirmations. To this day, there is still no sufficient evidence that proves what happened to the colony. Number 4. Cattle mutilations. Between April and October of 1975, nearly 200 cases of cattle mutilations were reported in the state of Colorado. Finding the cattle corpses was always a disturbing scene. The ears, eyes, udders, anuses, sex organs, and tongues were removed with sharp, clean objects. The carcasses had been drained of blood, and no tracks or footprints were ever seen in the general vicinity. Throughout the later half of the 1970s, cases had continued to roll in throughout the U.S. By the end of 1979, thousands of reports of cattle mutilations accumulated. This caused millions of dollars in livestock losses. The FBI finally got involved in the weird occurrences. As fast as the FBI opened the investigation, they closed it. On January 15, 1980, the FBI put out a statement that the mutilations were caused by common predators in the area. The majority of the local ranchers disagreed with the FBI's conclusion, and thus many conspiracy theories have been born. This is not the only documented occurrence of mutilation in livestock. The oldest known documentation is from 1606 in England. Whole slaughters of sheep were mutilated in the same way. Some of the slaughters ranged in the hundreds of sheep that were mutilated. It is reported that in most cases, the carcasses are drained of blood, and there is no blood in the vicinity. Other cases say the incisions are surgical, and there was a chemical smell at the site. Number 5. C.I.A Deaths. Forensic neuroimaging expert Christopher Green says he has dealt with hundreds of patients who were injured or died after interacting with UFOs. Mr. Green is the go-to physician in the Department of Defense for unexplained morbidity and mortality. He investigates injuries and death resulting from contact with unidentified aerial objects. Some of Dr. Green's work has been declassified following a Freedom of Information Act request in 2017 that was finally released by the U.S. government in 2022. In the highly redacted paper, Green writes about symptoms ranging from multiple sclerosis, brain damage, burns, and paralysis in the patients that had close encounters with the third or fourth kind. He also stated that 1 in 10 patients died within 7 years of the reported encounter. Dr. Green also said many of the UFO sightings were described as hovering or moving in odd ways. Some did show clear advanced cloaking technology. Others showed emanations of funny lights, patterns, and strobes. There are a lot of cases of things that instantaneously appear and instantaneously disappear. Mr. Green also stated, without violating his classified status, quote, "It is reasonable that reasonable people are concerned about UFOs," unquote. Some of the injuries resemble the mysterious Havana syndrome, which came to light in 2016 when diplomats at the Cuban embassy remember hearing a loud, directed noise, and soon after became disoriented, nauseous, and some even reported brain damage. This is believed to be the work of a focused attack from an outside entity, believed to be Russian experimentation with neurological weapons. The U.S. in recent years has ramped up its efforts in creating official groups to investigate these events as they are largely unstudied. With occurrences becoming more frequent and the government slowly releasing information, it is safe to say something is going on that can't be explained. It is also less and less likely that we are alone in this universe.